They dragged her by the ankles, and the snow tried to keep her. It packed into her hair, into the torn seam of her dress, into the raw skin at her wrists where the rope bit and bit again. Her shoulder struck a buried root, the jolt stole her breath, and the world flashed white, not with mercy but with pain. Above her, voices argued like crows. Don't bruise her face, buyers pay for pretty. She's a rare Omega, they'll pay for breathing. Not if she freezes first. Cyprian swallowed blood and ice. The gag was a strip of leather that tasted of old sweat and cheap ale. She tried to twist, to hook her heel into the snow, to force them to stop. The rope around her ankles held. The men laughed as if she were a stubborn sled. In the gap between pines, lantern light flickered ahead, golden dots in a dark that had teeth. The night market. She'd heard of it in the way people spoke of plague, not sure it existed until it took someone you loved. Her breath steamed through her nose. Her glands throbbed under the suppressant patch on her throat, the small square of adhesive that burned like nettle. The patch kept her scent crushed down, kept her from calling every alpha within 5 miles to her like an opened vein. It was also the only reason she was still alive. A rare Omega didn't make it to Market Hole without one. They hauled her into the lantern-lit corridor between canvas stalls, where snow had been trampled into black slush, and the air was thick with smoke and spice and hot metal. Shifters moved through the press, wolves with their eyes too bright, bears who didn't bother hiding their bulk, sleek fox-faced men with rings in their ears. Humans, too, with their shoulders tucked in and their hands too busy with coins. Nobody looked at her like a person. They looked like buyers look at a ring on velvet. The men stopped at a stall draped in crimson cloth. The sign above it wasn't a word but a symbol, a loop knotted into itself, inked in silver. Oath Trade. The merchant behind the counter had hair the color of dried sage and eyes like glass marbles. Her nails were stained black, and the skin around her mouth was cracked from some caustic brew. "Where did you find this one?" the merchant asked, voice bored in the way cruelty gets when it's practiced. "North Pass," one of the hunters said, spitting to the side. "Tried to run, fell into a snare. Lucky for her. Lucky." Cyprian's wrists screamed when she tried to pull them under her. Her fingers were numb, she couldn't feel the tips. She could still feel the fear, though bright and sharp, a living thing in her ribs. The merchant leaned forward and sniffed the air, not like a person but like an animal deciding if meat was spoiled. "Suppressant's decent. You keep her quiet?" "Mostly." Cyprian made a sound around the gag, a wet, furious protest that tasted like humiliation. The hunter jerked the rope to shut her up. Her teeth clicked hard enough to sting. The merchant's gaze dropped to Cyprian's throat. "A winterbloom gland pattern," she murmured, almost pleased. "No wonder you dragged her in half-dead, those sell." Cyprian didn't know what winterbloom meant in their mouths, only that it made them hungry. "Fine," the merchant said. "Put her on the block, midnight bell, and if she goes into heat, you'll owe me for the trouble." A hand shoved Cyprian forward. Her knees hit the slush, soaking instantly through fabric that had once been warm. A chain looped around her waist. Iron, cold so deep it felt like the inside of a grave. They snapped her to a post, tightened the gag, and stepped away as if she were a bag of grain. The market moved around her without shame. Someone laughed. Someone bargained. Someone cried softly behind a stall where a man's shadow leaned too close to a smaller one. Cyprian fixed her eyes on the snow beyond the lanterns and tried to breathe like she was not here. She had been a courier once, fast and forgettable, slipping across borders with letters tucked into her boots and her hair braided tight. She had learned to measure danger by scent and silence. She had learned that a pack's laws were only as strong as the alpha who enforced them. She had learned, too late, that not all alphas were bound by anything but appetite. The bell rang at midnight. Not a church bell. This was a brutal iron clang that vibrated in bone. The merchant's assistants hauled Cyprian up by her chain. They yanked her onto a low platform slick with melted snow. Lanterns swung overhead, making the crowd look like a sea of faces drifting in and out of shadow. The merchant took her place beside Cyprian and lifted Cyprian's chin with 2 fingers, as if presenting a necklace. Lot 17, she called. Omega, unmated, rare gland signature, suppressed, obedient enough and pretty. Obedient. Cyprian's stomach turned, and fury flared so hot it threatened to melt the suppressant patch right off her throat. Bids began, numbers tossed like stones. A man with wolf eyes called a price that made the hunters grin. A woman in a dark hood raised it without hesitation. 2 fox shifters laughed, bumped shoulders, and doubled it, as if buying her were a game. Cyprian's pulse hammered. The suppressant patch burned worse as her body sensed the attention, the heat of so many alphas and near-alphas, and the sharp, clean scent of power that meant command. Instinct pressed against her ribs, begging for safety the way thirst begs for water. There was no safety here, only cages with different price tags. Then the crowd shifted. A hush threaded through the noise like a blade sliding free. He moved through the ring of bodies without pushing, yet bodies yielded, men stepping aside as if their bones remembered what it meant to be under an order. The air seemed to thicken around him, charged, the way it does before lightning chooses a tree. He wasn't the largest alpha present. He wasn't the loudest. He wasn't laughing. He wore a dark coat with a high collar crusted with snow, as if he'd walked a long way without bothering to seek shelter. A sigil shone on his shoulder clasp, an iron tower with a single star above it. Fortress wardens, enforcers, the kind of men who kept border treaties from bleeding out. His face was cut from angles, cheekbones like the edge of a blade, mouth set in a line that looked less like anger and more like decision. His hair was black and damp with snowmelt, tied at the nape. His eyes, Cyprian stopped breathing. Not because they were pretty, because they were controlled. The calm in them was not kindness. It was restraint, a thing held so tightly it could snap. The merchant brightened, greed finding a familiar shape. Ah, Warden Tavern. So his name had weight. The alpha didn't look at the merchant. He looked at Cyprian, not at her torn dress, not at the curve of her throat, not at the bruise blooming on her cheek where a boot had caught her. He looked at her wrists, the rope, the iron chain, the gag, something in his jaw flexed. The merchant tried to reclaim the stage with a laugh. A special find tonight, isn't she? The kind that keeps a house warm. Tavern's gaze flicked to the merchant then, cold enough to frost glass. Name your final. The merchant's smile sharpened. Warden, surely you'll name it. The hush deepened. Even the hunters looked uneasy now, their swagger thinning. Everyone knew what it meant when a fortress warden showed up in a market like this. It meant the law had either failed or been bought. The merchant named a number that made several bidders hiss. Tavern didn't blink. He reached into his coat and set a pouch on the counter with a soft, heavy sound. Coins, not just any coins. Treaty-minted iron rounds with the tower and star stamped deep. The merchant's fingers trembled as she counted without meaning to. Sold, she said too quickly, as if afraid the word might be taken back. The chain at Cyprian's waist was unhooked from the post and snapped to Tavern's wrist instead, like a leash. The world tilted. Cyprian's mind scrambled, searching for the trick. A fortress warden didn't buy an Omega at a night market unless he planned to use her: politics, pleasure, punishment. None of those meant freedom. Tavern stepped close. The smell of him hit her despite the suppressant: cedar smoke and clean steel, a winter forest after lightning. Her body reacted, traitorous, with a shiver that wasn't only cold. He reached out. Cyprian flinched so hard her shoulders cramped. His hand paused in the air, fingers spread, as if he'd caught himself from touching a wound. Then he tugged a knife from his belt, not brandished, just present, an honest object, and cut the rope at her wrists. The fibers snapped. Blood rushed back into her hands in hot needles. Cyprian stared at him, uncomprehending. Tavern didn't speak. He shrugged his coat off with a single motion and draped it over her shoulders. Warmth wrapped her like a spell, heavy wool, fur-lined collar, the faintest trace of his scent embedded in the fabric. It was almost unbearable. He unhooked a canteen from his belt and held it out. Cyprian didn't take it, because water could be drugged, because kindness could be bait, because the most expensive cage was the one that felt like relief. Tavern waited, perfectly still, as if he had all the time in the world and no need to force her. Her throat burned from the gag, from the cold. She wanted water so badly it hurt. She shook her head once. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in something like assessment. He tipped the canteen back and drank first, slow and deliberate, then offered it again. Cyprian's hands trembled as she took it. She drank too fast. Water spilled down her chin onto his coat, darkening the wool. She hated herself for the way her body softened with it. Tavern reached up and unbuckled the gag. The leather slid free with a wet sound. Air hit her mouth like a shock. She coughed once hard. Then she whispered, voice shredded, "Why?" The word came out like an accusation and a plea twisted together. His gaze didn't leave her face. "Stand." Cyprian's knees wanted to fold. She pushed anyway, muscles shaking. The platform seemed too high, the crowd too close. Tavern stepped between her and the watchers, blocking their sightline with his body and his authority. The market noise returned in a murmur, disappointed, already hunting for the next cruelty. He tugged the chain once, not hard, a signal. Cyprian's pride flared. "I can walk." "Then do it." His voice was low, rough-edged, like gravel under snow. She slid off the platform. Her boots were gone, stolen. Her feet hit the slush, numb immediately. She took one step, then another, each one a bite. Tavern matched her pace, close enough that if she fell he could catch her, but not touching her unless necessary. It was infuriating and disorienting, control without grabbing, command without the usual hunger. They moved past stalls where vows were sold in inked scrolls, where a weeping man pressed his thumb into a basin of black liquid while a merchant smiled, where a shifter's eyes went glassy as a contract sealed. Oath trade wasn't just words. It was binding, literal, something in the blood and the bones. Cyprian's stomach sank. If he meant to bind her, he didn't even need chains. He could buy her promise and make her believe it was her own. At the edge of the market, Tavern stopped beside a narrow cart piled with hay. A driver sat hunched, face hidden, holding reins like a man holding his last nerve. Tavern spoke to the driver in a tone that allowed no argument. A purse changed hands. The driver nodded once. Tavern turned to Cyprian. "Up." She stared at the cart. "Where are you taking me?" His eyes flicked to the suppressant patch on her throat. "Somewhere that isn't here. That doesn't answer me. It's all you get." Cyprian laughed, sharp and broken. "So that's it, a different market, a different buyer." Tavern's gaze hardened. "If I wanted you for myself, you'd know." The words landed like a slap, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. There was no heat in him right now, no haze of desire, only purpose. Cyprian hated purpose. Purpose was what men used to excuse anything. Her feet were turning into blocks of ice. Her hands, too, she could feel the first tremors of shock creeping up her spine. Pride didn't warm you. She climbed into the cart, pulling Tavern's coat tighter around her. The hay pricked through her thin dress. She curled inward, small despite herself, and tried to keep her teeth from chattering. Tavern climbed in after her, sitting on the edge, not close enough to pin her, but close enough to shield her from the wind. The driver clicked the reins. The cart lurched forward. Lantern light fell behind. Darkness rose up, vast and cold, broken only by the pale smear of snow. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The wheels creaked. The wind sighed through bare branches. Somewhere far off, a wolf called, the sound stretched thin and lonely. Cyprian's mind spun in circles it couldn't escape. She pressed her fingers to her wrists where the rope had been. The skin was raw, but the pain proved she was still in her body. "Warden," she said finally, because the merchant had called him that, and it was better than saying his name like she knew it. "If you bought me to be merciful, you picked the wrong girl." He didn't look at her. "Mercy isn't why." "Then what is?" A pause, the kind that meant he was deciding how much truth she could carry without breaking. "Your scent signature," he said. "Winterbloom, that's what the merchants call it." Cyprian's stomach tightened. "I didn't choose it. I know. You don't know anything about me." His gaze cut to hers, quick, measuring, and for a heartbeat she saw something under the restraint. Not hunger, not pity. Weariness, heavy as armor. "I know what they do to Omegas like you," he said, voice low enough that it felt like confession. "I know how fast a rare one disappears. I know the border chiefs will pretend not to see it if it keeps their coffers full." Cyprian's throat burned. "So you're different." He didn't answer. The cart rolled over a rut. Cyprian's shoulder knocked Tavern's arm. She flinched, expecting a grip, a shove, a reprimand. He didn't move. She hated that, too, how his stillness made her feel the shape of her own fear. They passed an abandoned watchtower, its stone bones half buried in snow. Cyprian recognized it. She had run past it once with a letter sewn into her sleeve, heart hammering, convinced she'd outrun a patrol. She hadn't outrun anything tonight. The suppressant patch began to itch. A crawling sensation under her skin, like her glands were waking up angry. Fear and exhaustion made the body do strange things. Heat was not always a calendar. Sometimes it was a trigger. Cyprian swallowed hard. If it hit now in this cart with this alpha close, she clenched her hands in the coat, nails digging into the wool, and forced her breathing into slower rhythms. "Don't, not now, not here." Tavern's head tilted slightly as if he heard something she hadn't said. "You're flaring," he murmured. Cyprian froze. "No, you are." His voice didn't change, but his posture did. He shifted a fraction away, creating space without announcing it. "Is it the suppressant failing?" "I don't know," her voice cracked. I can't afford." "No." The word came out sharp, a command aimed at her panic, not at her body. "You don't owe anyone a heat." Cyprian's laugh was almost a sob. "That's not how it works." His gaze slid to her throat. "May I?" she jerked back. "Don't touch me." Tavern held up both hands empty. "Then tell me." "Does it hurt? Is it burning?" Cyprian pressed her palm to the patch. The adhesive was warm, too warm, as if the skin beneath it had turned feverish. "It's itching." Tavern exhaled slowly. "Those patches aren't meant for days. They'll inflame you." Cyprian's stomach twisted with dread. "So you bought me to keep me alive until you can sell me properly." The words came out before she could stop them. They were ugly, raw with every betrayal she'd swallowed. Tavern's eyes snapped to hers. "If you keep looking for the knife, you'll miss the hand that's trying to pull you out of the pit." Cyprian stared, breath fogging between them. He looked away first, jaw tight. "We stop at the river inn. You'll get warmth, food, a real suppressant tincture from an apothecary who doesn't cut it with ash. And then," Tavern's silence answered. Cyprian's pulse began to race again, not with heat this time, but with the instinct that always saved couriers, the instinct for maps, for routes, for angles. If there was an inn, there were doors. If there were doors, there were exits. She forced her hands to relax, forced her shoulders to slump as if defeat had finally won. Let him think you're small. Let him think you're tired. Let him think you're prey. It wasn't a lie. She was tired, she was prey, but prey still had teeth. The cart rolled on. By the time the inn's lights glowed through the trees, Cyprian's body was shaking hard enough to rattle her bones. The cold had burrowed deep, and exhaustion had made her limbs heavy. Still, she kept her eyes open, tracking everything: the path's curve, the stream's sound, the fence line, the stable door. The inn was squat and sturdy, built from dark logs with a roof thick with snow. Smoke curled from a chimney, and the smell of stew hit Cyprian like a memory of being safe. Her stomach clenched painfully. Tavern hopped down and held out a hand. Cyprian stared at it. "Your feet are bare," he said, and there was a rough note under the restraint now, something that sounded almost like anger at the world. "Take the hand or fall. Choose." She hated that he made sense. She took it. His palm was warm, calloused. He didn't squeeze. He simply anchored her, and for one shameful second she leaned into it too much, because her knees were folding and her pride couldn't hold her up anymore. Inside, heat wrapped around her like a wave. Her skin prickled as blood rushed back into numb places. Pain flared in her toes. She bit her lip hard enough to taste copper. The common room was half full: travelers with wet cloaks, a pair of merchants, a man asleep with his head on his arms. Conversations faltered when Tavern walked in, not because he was beautiful, because he was recognized. The innkeeper, a broad-shouldered woman with silver hair in a braid, came forward wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes flicked to Cyprian, to Tavern's coat around her shoulders, to the chain looped loosely at Tavern's wrist. "Warden," the innkeeper said carefully. "Trouble, shelter," Tavern replied. "A room, hot water, and send word to Apollon the apothecary. Tell him I need a suppressant tincture that won't kill an Omega." The innkeeper's face tightened: sympathy, fear, calculation. "I'll send." Cyprian's heart sank at the word Omega spoken aloud. Heads turned. Interest sharpened. Tavern's hand moved, not touching her, but hovering at the small of her back as he guided her toward the stairs. "Eyes forward," he murmured, so quietly only she heard. "Don't give them anything." Cyprian lifted her chin and walked like she wasn't shaking. The room upstairs was small but clean: a bed, a wash basin, a chair, a window crusted with frost, a latch on the inside of the door. Cyprian's gaze fixed on that latch like it was salvation. Tavern shut the door behind them. He didn't lock it. He didn't move to block it. He stood near the wall, as far from the bed as the room allowed, arms at his sides. "I'll wait outside while you wash," he said. Cyprian didn't move. Suspicion was a habit carved into her bones. "Why are you doing this?" His gaze didn't waver. "Because the treaty is breaking." Cyprian's stomach dropped. "What does that have to do with me?" Tavern's voice was flat, but something in it strained, like a rope pulled too tight. "Everything." He reached into his coat pocket, now hanging over his arm because she still wore it, and pulled out a folded document sealed with dark wax. He didn't offer it. He simply let her see the seal, the tower and star on one side, and on the other, a wolf's head crowned with antlers. Border Pax, Fortress Authority, a marriage seal. Cyprian's mouth went dry. "No," Tavern's eyes held hers. "They want a rare Omega to bind the pact. They believe a Winterbloom's signature will make the bond unbreakable." Cyprian's vision tunneled. The room's warmth felt suddenly suffocating. "You bought me to hand me over. I bought you so they wouldn't tear you apart before we reached the fortress," he said. "I bought you so the market wouldn't sell you to a man who'd keep you under his bed until you forgot your own name. And instead you'll give me to chiefs who'll call it peace." Tavern's jaw tightened. "If I refuse, the border raids resume, villages burn, Omegas vanish, children starve." Cyprian's nails dug into her palms. She could see it too. She'd carried letters through scorched fields. She'd watched smoke rise from places that used to be homes. So that was the cage, a cage made of other people's lives. Her voice came out thin. You're not merciful, you're practical. His eyes flicked down, a brief crack in the armor. Yes. Cyprian's lungs fought for air. She turned toward the window, toward the frost-smeared dark outside. If she screamed, would anyone come? Would anyone care? The inn was full of people who would sell her again for a handful of iron. She pressed her forehead to the cold pane until it stung. Behind her, Tavern's voice softened, not gentle, but quieter, the sound of someone speaking to a skittish animal without wanting to startle it. Wash, eat, sleep. Apollon will bring the tincture. Tomorrow we ride to the fortress. And then you trade me. Tavern didn't deny it. Cyprian closed her eyes and let the despair roll over her, heavy and thick. She let it press her down until she thought she might sink through the floor. Then, in the dark space behind her eyelids, something else stirred. Not hope, not yet, a memory, her mother's voice years ago whispering as she braided Cyprian's hair tight enough to ache. Not all Omegas are soft, love. Some of us are storms. We just learn to hide our thunder until we need it. Cyprian's glands pulsed, angry at suppression, hungry for release. Winterbloom, the merchant had said with delight. Storm. Cyprian turned back to Tavern. Her face felt too calm, like ice over deep water. How do these treaties work, the binding? Tavern studied her, cautious now. Oh, think, scent, touch, a public sealing, witnessed by alphas from both sides. Cyprian nodded slowly, as if absorbing facts. Inside, her mind was already tearing the map apart and rebuilding it. A public sealing meant a crowd. A crowd meant air thick with scent. Oathink meant blood and ritual and bodies pressed close. All it would take was one wrong surge, one rupture of control, and the room would become chaos. If she could break her suppression at the right moment, if she could turn her Winterbloom signature from a prize into a weapon, Tavern's gaze sharpened. What are you thinking? Cyprian pulled his coat tighter around herself, not as comfort, but as armor. She met his eyes and let a sliver of truth show, just enough to make him uneasy. I'm thinking, she said softly, that if you mean to trade me like a coin, I'll spend myself first. Tavern went very still, and for the first time since the market, something hot flashed through his restrained anger, not at her, but at the thought of her broken in his hands, used by his choices. You will not hurt yourself, he said, voice like iron. Cyprian's smile was small and bitter. Then don't take me to be traded. Silence swelled between them, thick with everything neither of them could afford to say. A knock sounded at the door. Tavern's head turned, instantly alert. The innkeeper's voice came through. Apollon's here. Tavern didn't move toward the door yet. His gaze stayed on Cyprian as if trying to read the storm under her skin. Wash, he said again, but now it sounded less like instruction and more like a plea disguised as command. I'll stand outside. No one comes in. Cyprian nodded once. Tavern stepped out and shut the door behind him. Cyprian stared at the latch, at the window, at the bed. Then she went to the wash basin and splashed hot water over her hands, watching the red marks on her wrists bloom darker with returning blood. She scrubbed the market stink from her skin until it hurt. In the mirror above the basin, her eyes looked too bright, too fevered. Winterbloom. Storm. Downstairs, voices rose and fell. Boots thumped. A murmur of respect followed Tavern's presence like a shadow. Cyprian dried her hands slowly, mind racing, heart steadying into something sharp. Tomorrow they would ride to the fortress. And somewhere inside that fortress, in a hall full of oathink and witnesses, she would make the air itself turn against the bargain. Because if Tavern Valorian thought he could buy her to save a treaty, he had mistaken what kind of Omega he'd dragged out of the snow. She wasn't a coin. She was weather. Apollon arrived with the smell of crushed herbs and burnt sugar clinging to him like a second coat. his fingers stained green-black from tinctures that never came out of skin. He didn't ask why a fortress warden had bought an Omega at a night market. He only looked once at Cyprian's throat, at the angry redness beneath the patch, and his mouth tightened, as if he'd bitten down on a curse. "You've been wearing this too long," he said quietly, and there was no judgment in it, only irritation aimed at whoever had forced the choice on her. It's not just suppression. It's irritation designed to provoke a flare when you're exhausted. Traders like Omegas more compliant when their bodies betray them. Cyprian's stomach turned, cold despite the room's warmth. "So I'm a timer they can wind up." Tavern stood by the door like a shadow with a pulse, watching Apollin's hands as if the apothecary were holding a blade. "Can you fix it?" "I can give her a tincture that calms without deadening," Apollin replied. "It won't erase what she is. It'll simply stop the fire from spreading when someone throws sparks." Cyprian flinched at the word fire because it felt too close to truth. Apollin set a small vial on the table. The liquid inside was pale gold, so clear it looked like melted light. "Sips now, 2 in the morning. If you take more, you'll go dull. If you take less, you'll burn. Don't be stubborn about it." Cyprian stared at the vial. "What's in it?" "Winterbark, bitterroot, a thread of moonmint." Apollin's eyes flicked up sharp. "And something else because your signature isn't common. Winterbloom, they call it at markets because they like pretty names for dangerous things. In old apothecary books, it's named differently." Tavern's voice came like a low bell. "Say it." Apollin hesitated. "Storm scent." The word hit Cyprian in the chest, a strange confirmation of the thought she'd tried not to trust. She swallowed, and her throat hurt around the lump that formed there. Apollin pushed the vial closer. "Drink, then rest. The road to the fortress is long, and you'll need your mind clear." Cyprian wrapped her fingers around the glass. The vial was warm from his palm. She lifted it, then paused, letting suspicion rise one last time like a tide testing the shore. Tavern moved, but only with his voice. "If you're thinking it's poison, I'll drink first." "Don't," Apollin snapped, offended on principle. Then his expression softened, and he looked at Cyprian as if she were someone's daughter, not someone's purchase. "I won't lie to you, girl. This won't free you. It'll only help you stay yourself long enough to choose what you do next." Choice. The word felt almost mythical. Cyprian took 2 sips. Bitterness flooded her tongue, clean and sharp, followed by a coolness that sank into her chest like snowmelt into earth. The itch under the patch eased by degrees, not vanishing but no longer screaming. Her heartbeat slowed, her thoughts unknotted. Apollin nodded once, satisfied. "Good, now." He held out a small tin. "This is salve for the irritation. The patch comes off tonight. If you keep it on, it will blister." Cyprian's hand tightened around the tin. "If I take it off, everyone will smell me." "Not if you stay wrapped in your warden's coat and keep to the road," Apollin said, and then he glanced at Tavern with something like warning. "And not if your warden has any sense about distance." Tavern's expression didn't change, but his gaze sharpened as if he accepted the rebuke. "I do." Apollin gathered his things and left without flourish, as if he'd done nothing more notable than mend a traveler's cough. When the door shut, silence filled the room, thicker than before. Cyprian sat on the bed, hands still around the tin, Tavern's coat still draped over her shoulders. The wool carried his scent in a way that made her body lean toward it while her mind stayed wary. Tavern spoke from near the wall. "I'll sleep in the hall. You think I'll run? I think you might try." His voice was honest enough to sting. "And if you do, I want it to be because you chose it with a clear head, not because panic drove you into the snow." Cyprian stared at him. "So you'll guard me from myself." Tavern's jaw flexed, the only sign that her words landed. "From them," he corrected, "and from whatever this bargain turns you into if I can." Cyprian's laugh came out small. You talk like you don't own the chain. Tavern lifted his wrist. The chain looped there was slack, almost ceremonial. This is theater. And the treaty? Cyprian asked, because she needed to hear it again to keep her anger sharp. That isn't theater. No, Tavern said, and the word came out heavy. That is a knife pressed to a town's throat. Cyprian looked away, fingers rubbing the salve tin until the metal warmed. Outside the window, snow drifted in slow, indifferent sheets. After a long moment, she asked the question that had been gnawing at her since he showed the seal. If you hate it, why agree to it? Tavern's gaze lowered, not in shame, but in fatigue. Because my fortress stands between hungry packs and soft villages. Because chiefs only respect peace when it costs them nothing. Because my council believes a bound Omega is cheaper than war. Cyprian's throat tightened. And you believe it too. Tavern's eyes lifted to hers. I believed it was the only thing left that might hold. The past tense caught her like a hook. She leaned forward slightly, heart picking up. And now? Tavern didn't answer for a beat, as if the truth in him had teeth and he was deciding whether to let it bite. Then he said, quietly, now I've seen the market's rope marks on your wrists. Now I've heard men argue about your body like it was a ration. Now I can't pretend the cost is abstract. Cyprian's pulse tripped. Her instincts, traitorous and hungry for safety, reached toward him anyway. She forced herself to stay cold. Pity doesn't free anyone. It isn't pity, Tavern said. His voice roughened just a fraction, and the restraint in him made it worse because it implied what he refused to become. It's refusal. Cyprian held his gaze until her eyes stung. Then she opened the salve tin and touched it with a fingertip, dragging the cool balm across the irritated skin around the patch. When she peeled the patch away, it tugged and burned, leaving a rectangle of angry red. The room seemed to change immediately, not with an explosion, but with a shift in pressure, like weather turning. Her scent slipped out, subtle at first, a clean brightness under the bitter edge of tincture, then richer, layered with something that reminded her of crushed white petals under frost. Tavern's breath hitched once. He turned his head, gaze going to the window as if he could find control out there in the snow. Cyprian watched him carefully, cataloging what he did not do. He did not step closer. He did not bare his teeth. He did not let his eyes go glassy. He simply moved 2 steps back, giving her space, and spoke through a tightened throat. Wrap the coat tighter. Cyprian did, the wool sealing her in. You're affected. I'm alive, Tavern replied. That's all. The honesty in it made something in her soften despite herself, a dangerous softness that could become attachment. She swallowed. Tomorrow, when they try to trade me, I'll break it. Tavern's head turned. How? I don't know yet, Cyprian admitted, and the admission tasted like steel. But I'm not walking onto a platform again, not for chiefs, not for councils, not for peace. Tavern stared at her for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was quieter than the snow. If you do this, they will call you a saboteur. They already call me property, Cyprian said. Let them learn a different word. Tavern's mouth tightened, a line that might have been approval or dread. Sleep, he said at last. We ride at dawn. He left, shutting the door behind him without locking it. Cyprian lay back on the bed, but sleep came in fragments. In each fragment she was dragged again through snow, rope burning her skin, voices laughing. In each fragment a different ending tried to take her, cage, altar, grave. She woke before dawn with the taste of iron in her mouth, and Tavern's coat still around her shoulders like a vow she hadn't agreed to. Downstairs, the inn smelled of bread and smoke. Tavern was already there, speaking with the innkeeper in low tones. When he saw Cyprian, his gaze flicked to her throat, to the now bare skin, and he nodded once as if acknowledging a choice. The innkeeper set a bundle on the counter. Boots, she said, brusque as armor. They're not pretty, but they're warm. Cyprian stared at the bundle. Why? The innkeeper's eyes narrowed. Because I know what markets do. Because I've buried girls whose names weren't worth remembering to the men who bought them. Her voice softened only slightly. And because you look like someone who might still run. Cyprian's fingers closed around the boots. Thank you. The innkeeper's gaze slid to Tavrin. If you're taking her to the fortress, you'd better keep your counsel's hands off her. Tavrin's voice was flat. That depends on what she does when we get there. Cyprian's pulse jumped. The innkeeper looked between them, reading something, then huffed. Fine, then keep her alive long enough to do it. Outside, the horses waited, steam rising from their nostrils. Tavrin swung into the saddle with efficient grace, then reached down. Cyprian hesitated only a moment before taking his forearm and letting him steady her up behind him. She expected his body heat to be overwhelming. Instead, he kept his posture rigid, leaving a fraction of space between them, enough that she could breathe without feeling trapped. It was a strange courtesy, more intimate than touch because it was deliberate restraint. They rode north, away from the inn, and toward the fortress that sat like a stone fist on the border. As the hours passed, the world narrowed to cold air, the rhythm of hooves, and the steady presence of Tavrin in front of her. His scent, dampened by snow and distance, still threaded through the air like a promise her instincts wanted to believe. Cyprian watched the road, but she also watched him, the way he scanned ridgelines, the way he listened to silence as if it spoke, the way his shoulders never truly relaxed. Once, near midday, they passed a burned farmhouse. Black beams jutted from snow like ribs. A child's wooden horse lay half-buried in ash. Cyprian felt Tavrin's body tense beneath her. "This is what the treaty is supposed to stop," he said, and he sounded like a man talking to himself more than to her. Cyprian tightened her grip on the saddle, knuckles pale. "And it uses a chained Omega to do it." Tavrin's voice went colder. "Yes." For the first time, Cyprian heard something in him that matched the storm in her, rage, controlled and bitter, pointed not outward, but inward at his own compromises. They reached the fortress at dusk. It rose out of the snow-dark hills with brutal elegance, its walls layered stone and iron, torches burning along the parapets like a crown of embers. The tower and star sigil hung over the gate, and guards snapped to attention when Tavrin approached. The gate opened with a groan of metal. Inside, the air smelled of oil, steel, and old smoke. Men and women moved with purpose, boots striking stone in steady beats. They glanced at Cyprian behind Tavrin, their eyes flicking quickly away as if looking too long might be dangerous. Tavrin dismounted and helped her down without touching more than necessary. Then he handed her a cloak dark, heavy, lined with fur, and his gaze held hers for a heartbeat. "This one is yours," he said, "not mine." Cyprian accepted it. The fur brushed her wrists where rope marks still lingered. "Is this another kind of chain?" Tavrin's mouth twitched, humorless. "If it is, you're welcome to throw it in my face later." He led her through corridors where banners hung like silent witnesses. The fortress wasn't decorative, it was functional, built to hold against siege and winter alike. The rules of this place were carved into its architecture. Narrow choke points, iron-bound doors, sightlines that favored defenders. In a small chamber near the inner keep, Tavrin stopped. "This room is guarded. You will not be touched here." Cyprian looked at the bed, the basin, the small fire burning behind iron mesh. "And I can't leave." "You can," Tavrin said. "If you run, you'll be caught. Not by me, perhaps, but by someone less careful." Cyprian's jaw tightened. "So I'm still a prisoner." Tavrin's gaze didn't flinch. "For tonight, yes." At least he didn't dress the truth in pretty words. He placed a tray on the table, bread, stew, a cup of something steaming. Then he pulled a folded paper from inside his coat and set it down beside the food. "What is that?" Cyprian asked. "A schedule," Tavern said. "The sealing is tomorrow at midday. The chiefs arrive at dawn. The council convenes at mid-morning. There will be a private Othink review before the hall opens." Cyprian stared at him. "Why tell me any of this?" Tavern's eyes met hers, steady as stone. "Because if you plan to break it, you should know what you're breaking. And because I am tired of men making plans with your body while you stand in the corner like furniture." The words stole her breath. She had expected him to fear her storm. She hadn't expected him to hand her a map. Cyprian picked up the schedule. Her courier's mind began to slice it into routes and opportunities. "Where does the Othink come from?" she asked. Tavern paused. "The Oathright brings it." "Oathright?" Cyprian repeated, tasting the word. "Like the market?" "Yes," Tavern said, and his voice darkened. "The same trade, laundered through legality." Cyprian's fingers tightened on the paper. "If I flood the hall with scent at the moment they apply the ink, will it ruin the binding?" "It will ruin the room," Tavern replied. "It may ruin you with it." Cyprian's gaze lifted, sharp. "I won't let them bind me, not with ink, not with scent, not with anything." Tavern looked at her as if she were a blade he had chosen to carry, knowing it could cut him. "If you do this, I may not be able to protect you from what follows." Cyprian forced herself to swallow the tremor in her throat. "Then don't promise protection. Promise truth." Tavern held her gaze. "Truth," he said. "If you shatter the treaty publicly, my council will call you a threat and demand your execution. If I shield you, they will call me traitor. If I obey them, you die." Cyprian's chest went tight. The stakes were finally plain, clean as a drawn line. Tavern's voice dropped lower. "Eat," he said, "and sleep if you can. Tomorrow will not forgive weakness." He turned to leave. Cyprian's words came out before she could stop them, raw and small. "Why did you pick me? Out of every Omega they could buy?" Tavern paused at the door. His back stayed rigid. "Because they asked for rare," he said quietly. "And rare draws every predator. I knew if I didn't buy you, the market would sell you to someone whose appetite would look like affection until you tried to breathe." Cyprian's eyes burned. "So you bought me to save me, and then you planned to trade me." Tavern's voice turned harsh, as if he hated himself for it. "I planned to trade you to stop villages from burning." Cyprian swallowed. "And now?" Tavern didn't look back, but his next words were softer. "Now I don't know how to live with either outcome." The door shut behind him. Cyprian sat with stew untouched, schedule in hand, and felt the storm inside her shift from anger to something more dangerous. Resolve. She could ruin the hall. That was easy. A rare Omega's scent, unmasked, could make even disciplined alphas turn feral for a heartbeat. She had always hated that power because it was not a power she chose. It was a vulnerability dressed as leverage. But if she used it carefully, if she aimed it like weather, not like fire, she could create chaos without letting anyone touch her in the confusion. She needed a buffer, a barrier, a way to throw scent outward without drowning in it herself. Her gaze fell on the cup of steaming liquid. Bitterroot tea, probably. Tavern had said Apollin's tincture calms without deadening. That meant it steadied the mind while leaving the body alive enough to choose. Cyprian drank. Slowly this time. That night she dreamed of halls full of ink and antlers and wolf eyes, and in the dream she stood on a platform again, but this time she didn't freeze. She opened her mouth and the air changed. Morning arrived with horn calls and the clatter of arriving escorts. From her small chamber, Cyprian heard the fortress wake into ceremony. Boots struck stone in disciplined rhythms. Doors opened and shut. Voices rose in controlled tones. A knock sounded. A guard's voice came through, formal. "You are requested for preparation." Cyprian pulled on the dark cloak. tied her hair back with a strip of cloth, and opened the door. Two women waited, fortress attendants with their expressions carefully neutral. They did not touch her, but they directed her with gestures that left no room for argument. They brought her to a bathing room where steam fogged the air and water ran hot. They washed her hair, combed it smooth, and dressed her in a simple gown of deep blue, the kind of color chosen to imply dignity without granting it. Around her throat, they offered a new patch, this one embossed with the fortress sigil. Cyprian stared at it until one attendant's hands faltered. "I'm not wearing that," Cyprian said, voice calm enough to frighten herself. "It's required," the attendant replied, and the words were practiced. "For the hall." Cyprian lifted her chin. "Then the hall will smell me." The attendant's eyes flicked to the other woman, fear flashing. "Warden Tavern is not my owner," Cyprian said, and her voice sharpened. "Bring your counsel my answer. They can bind treaties with ink if they like. They won't bind me with a patch." The attendants left, hurried. Cyprian stood alone in steam, heart steady. If they came with force, she would scream. Not because it would save her, but because it would make the fortress hear the truth of what they were doing. Shame was a weapon, too, when wielded publicly. Minutes passed like stretched wire. Then Tavern entered, escorted by no one. He shut the door behind him and leaned his shoulder against it as if holding back the entire fortress with bone and will. His gaze went immediately to her throat, bare, unpatched. "Cyprian," he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like something he'd been trying not to taste. "They told you to wear it." "They can tell," Cyprian replied. "They can't make." Tavern's eyes darkened. "They will try." Cyprian stepped closer until the steam blurred the edges of him, until his scent pressed at her restraint. "Are you going to let them?" For a moment, Tavern looked like a man standing on a ledge. "I can't stop the council from convening," he said, "but I can stop hands from being laid on you in my fortress." "My fortress," he corrected himself, and the possessive in it wasn't about ownership. It was about responsibility. Cyprian's throat tightened. "Then hear me. I'm going to break the ceiling." Tavern's eyes narrowed slightly. "Tell me how." Cyprian inhaled, gathering the plan like a cloak. "When they bring the oath ink and call witnesses, they'll want me near the chiefs. Close enough for touch, close enough for scent. If I flood the hall right then, every alpha in that room will react." Tavern's jaw tightened. "They could hurt you in the chaos." "They already planned to hurt me in the order," Cyprian said, voice low and fierce. "Chaos is my only chance to move." Tavern was silent long enough that the steam seemed to thicken between them. Then he said, carefully, "If you do this, do it only when I am within arm's reach." Cyprian blinked. "Why would you help me sabotage your treaty?" Tavern's gaze lifted to hers, and something in it finally cracked, restraint giving way not to hunger, but to a choice that would burn his life down. "Because I won't stand in a hall and watch them ink your skin like paper," he said. "Because peace bought with your throat is not peace." Quieter kind of war. Cyprian's chest hurt. "They'll ruin you for it." Tavern's mouth twisted, almost a smile, almost grief. "Then let them try." A knock sounded at the outer door, impatient, official. Tavern pushed away from the inner door and stepped towards Cyprian, close enough that she felt his heat, close enough that her body trembled with instinctive relief. He did not touch her. He simply lowered his voice to a murmur meant only for her. "When it starts," he said, "keep your eyes on me. If you feel yourself slipping, anchor to my voice." Cyprian swallowed. "What if your voice isn't enough?" Tavern's gaze held hers like a vow. "Then I will carry you out." The outer door opened before they answered. A council messenger stood there, stiff with authority. "Warden, the hall is ready." Tavern's posture became fortress stone again. "We are coming." He offered Cyprian his forearm, not his hand. Cyprian took it. The Hall of Oaths was built like a theater for power. Rows of stone benches rose in tiers. Banners hung heavy. A brazier burned at the center, its smoke threaded with herbs meant to sharpen attention and dull dissent. At the far end stood a raised dais with a long table where the council sat, men and women in dark cloaks trimmed with iron. Their eyes were the kind that measured lives in columns. On the opposite side, the border chiefs waited with their entourage. Wolf shifters with antlered crowns, their pelts worn like triumph. Their scent rolled through the hall, thick with dominance, meant to claim the space before any ink touched skin. Cyprian felt her stomach tighten as the chief's eyes slid over her, appraising, hungry in a way that didn't bother to hide behind politeness. Tavern's arm tensed under her fingers. His voice came low. "Do not look at them. Look at the floor, or look at me." Cyprian lifted her chin instead, because she was tired of lowering her gaze for men who thought it was their right to own the horizon. The Oathright entered carrying a lacquered box. The symbol on the box matched the market's silver knot. Legality and cruelty wearing the same face, only cleaner. Cyprian's pulse ticked faster. A counselor rose. His voice boomed across the hall. "We convene under iron and star to bind peace between fortress and border. Let the offering be presented." Offering. The word landed like a stone in Cyprian's gut. Tavern stepped forward with her measured pace, bringing her closer to the brazier, closer to the dais, closer to the chiefs who waited like wolves who had learned to smile. Cyprian felt the tincture in her bloodstream, cool clarity holding the edges of her mind together. Beneath that clarity, her glands pulsed, awake, ready, storm scent pressing against her skin. The Oathright opened the lacquered box. Inside were 2 shallow bowls of black ink that gleamed as if it drank light. The air seemed to tighten, as if the room itself held breath. A border chief stepped forward. He was tall, antler-crowned, his eyes bright with predatory satisfaction. He smiled at Cyprian as if she were already beneath him. "Rare," he said, savoring the word. "The fortress offers us winterbloom." Cyprian's mouth went dry. Tavern's voice cut through, cold and flat. "The fortress offers a treaty." The chief's smile widened. "And the treaty comes with scent and flesh to anchor it." A low murmur rippled through the benches. Some approval, some discomfort, most of it simply calculation. Cyprian's fingers tightened on Tavern's forearm until she felt muscle under skin, strength restrained. This was the moment where order tried to become permanent. Tavern angled his body slightly, shifting so that he stood between Cyprian and the chief's reaching hand. It was subtle, but everyone in the hall noticed, because power notices power. The counselor's eyes narrowed. "Warden Tavern." "Present her." Tavern didn't move aside. Silence dropped like an axe. Cyprian heard her own heartbeat, fast and loud. Tavern's voice remained controlled, but it carried. "She is not an object to be handled." The border chief's lips curled. "Then why bring her?" Tavern's jaw tightened. Cyprian realized with sudden clarity that he was giving her a gift he could never take back: time. A few heartbeats of tension in which the room's attention locked on him, not on her, allowing her to choose the exact moment to strike. She inhaled slowly, filling her lungs with smoke-laced air, and then she stepped half a pace forward. Tavern's arm tensed. His voice, barely a thread, reached her. "Now," Cyprian answered with a whisper meant only for him. "Now." She loosened the cloak at her throat. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a theatrical rip. It was simply the removal of one last barrier between her and the air. Then Cyprian did what she had never allowed herself to do, not once in her life. She stopped suppressing. She let her scent open like a door in a storm. The hall changed in an instant. It wasn't a sweet perfume. It was winter brightness snapped open, frost and crushed petals, and the sharp ozone of air before lightning. It rolled outward in a wave that made alphas stiffen, then sway, then snarl. Conversations died mid-breath. The chief's eyes flared with sudden heat, their composure cracking like thin ice. Even counselors straightened as if struck, some gripping the table, some inhaling too hard to spite themselves. Instinct surged through the room, blind and ancient. For a heartbeat, Cyprian felt herself teeter on the edge of losing her own mind to the flood. The world tilted. Her skin prickled. Her body begged for safety, for claim, for arms around her to anchor her. Tavern's voice cut through, low and commanding, the sound of a door slamming shut against chaos. Cyprian, eyes. She snapped her gaze to him. His eyes were dark, controlled, furious with restraint, and in them she found the thing she needed: presence. Not ownership, not hunger, a steady point in weather. Breathe, Tavern said, each word slow and deliberate. In, out, stay with me. Cyprian forced her lungs to follow. The tincture steadied her, keeping her mind from dissolving. Around them, the hall erupted. Border guard lunged, not toward Cyprian, but toward Tavern, offended, threatened. Another grabbed his own chief by the arm as the chief started forward with a low sound that was not speech anymore. A counselor shouted for incense, for iron-ward smoke, for anything to dampen the scent storm. Guards moved, clashing, boots scraping stone. Someone knocked over a brazier tool. Sparks leapt. The oathwright tried to close the lacquered box, hands shaking, but the ink bowls sloshed. Black droplets spattered the floor. Cyprian saw the opportunity like an open gate. She stepped sideways, pulling free of Tavern's arm, cloak swirling. Her bare feet, now in boots, found traction on stone. She moved toward the dais, toward the oath ink. Tavern swore under his breath and followed immediately, cutting a path through the chaos with his body and his authority. He didn't grab her. He stayed close enough to shield. A counselor shouted, voice thick with anger. Seize her. Two guards started forward, but they hesitated, scent battered, caught between duty and instinct. Cyprian reached the table. The oath ink sat there like a promise waiting to be weaponized. She did not dip her fingers in it. She did not smear it on herself. She did something simpler, uglier, and more final. She knocked the bowls over. Black ink cascaded across polished wood, down the front of the dais, splattering onto stone like spilled blood. The symbol of binding became a mess no one could pretend was sacred. A sound tore from the border chief's throat, rage, humiliation, hunger, all tangled. You, Cyprian backed away, breath ragged, scent still rolling. I'm not your piece, she shouted, and her voice carried because everyone was listening now, even those fighting their own instincts. I'm not your treaty, I'm not your offering. If you want peace, learn to make it without chaining someone. The hall shook with noise. A counselor rose, face white with fury. Warden Tavern, control her. Tavern stepped in front of Cyprian, his body a wall. His voice was iron. No, the single word cut deeper than any speech. Silence rippled uneven, stunned because refusal from a fortress warden in his own hall was not common. It was rebellion spoken aloud. The counselor's mouth twisted. Then you betray your oath. Tavern didn't flinch. I uphold it, he said. My oath is to protect this fortress and those within it. Not to deliver a woman to wolves and call it diplomacy. The border chief's eyes went murderous. Then we returned to raids. Tavern's gaze held steady. Then we fight, he said, and it was not bravado. It was acceptance. Cyprian's heart slammed against her ribs. She smelled fear in the room now, sharp and sour, because war was suddenly real again, not a story told to justify cruelty. She also smelled something else, relief faint from somewhere among the benches, as if some people had been waiting for someone to finally say no. The counselor's voice rose, trembling with cold rage. You will be stripped of rank, you will be tried. And she will be. Tavern moved so fast it startled her. He turned, not toward the counselor, but toward the nearest guard captain, one of his own, and his voice became a command that cracked like a whip. "Open the south passage," Tavern said. "Now." The captain's eyes widened. "Warden, now," Tavern repeated, and the captain, trained to obey before understanding, snapped a hand signal. Cyprian's breath caught. South passage meant escape routes, smuggler tunnels, the fortress's hidden veins. Tavern grabbed Cyprian then, not roughly, but decisively, his hand closing around her forearm, warm and unyielding. "Run," he said into her ear. "With me." Cyprian's feet moved before her mind caught up, boots pounding stone, cloak whipping behind her like a banner of stolen dignity. Guards shouted. Someone lunged. Tavern's shoulder slammed into a pursuing man, sending him stumbling, Tavern never breaking stride. They plunged into corridors that narrowed and twisted, the fortress's public grandeur giving way to functional stone. Torches blurred. Cyprian's scent storm began to ebb as she forced herself to breathe, to close the door she'd thrown open. The tincture kept her from collapsing into panic, but her body still trembled with the aftershock of power. Tavern led her down a stairwell hidden behind a wall panel. Cold air surged up from below, carrying the smell of damp earth and old iron. The south passage was a tunnel carved through rock, reinforced with timber, sloping downward toward the outside world. Tavern's boots struck puddles. Water splashed Cyprian's hem. Behind them, noise echoed. Pursuit, commands, the fortress waking into full alarm. Cyprian's lungs burned. "They'll hunt you." Tavern didn't slow. "Let them. They'll call you traitor." Tavern's voice was a harsh laugh. "They already did." A metal gate blocked the tunnel's end, barred from the outside. The guard captain stood there, face pale, hands shaking as he worked the mechanism. "Warden," the captain said, voice breaking. "If you go, there's no return." Tavern's gaze flicked to the man, and for a moment his voice softened, not with doubt but with something like sorrow. "You know what they asked me to do?" The captain swallowed hard. "Yes," Tavern nodded once. "Then remember why." The gate groaned open. Night hit them like a wall, snow, wind, and the vast dark beyond the fortress's reach. They stumbled out onto a narrow ledge path that wound down the mountainside. Below, trees swayed like black seaweed in a storm. Tavern pulled Cyprian close, not in intimacy, but in necessity, his arm around her shoulders to keep her from slipping. Together they half ran, half slid down the path as the fortress's alarm bell began to ring, deep and relentless. The sound followed them, accusing, enormous. Cyprian's chest hurt as if each bell toll struck her ribs. When they reached the tree line, Tavern finally stopped, bracing both hands on his knees for a heartbeat. His breath steamed in harsh bursts. Cyprian stood beside him, trembling, her scent now mostly contained beneath cloak and sheer will. They were out. They were also nothing. No fortress. No rank. No protection except what they carried in their bodies. Cyprian looked up at Tavern, at the man who had just burned his life down in front of a hall full of witnesses. "Why?" she asked again, because the word had changed shape. It no longer meant, "Why did you buy me?" It meant, "Why did you choose ruin?" Tavern's eyes were dark, and in the darkness she saw exhaustion, fury, and something that looked like relief sharp enough to cut. "Because I couldn't do it," he said simply. "Because the moment you knocked their ink over, I realized I was watching the only honest act in that hall, and I couldn't stand on the wrong side of it." Cyprian's throat tightened until she thought she might choke. Far above, torchlight moved along the fortress wall, searchers. Tavern turned, scanning the woods. "We move," he said. "I have horses cached farther down. I planned for exile more than once. I just hoped I'd never need the plan." Cyprian swallowed. "You planned for leaving." "I planned for every outcome," Tavern replied. "That's what wardens do." They moved through the trees, snow muffling their steps. The wind cut, but the cloak held warmth. Cyprian's body still shook, not from cold alone but from the aftertaste of the scent storm, the knowledge of what she could do if cornered again. After an hour, Tavern led her to a small hollow hidden by dense fir branches. 2 horses stood there, tethered, heads low, their backs dusted with snow. Saddlebags bulged with supplies, dried meat, a water skin, a small pouch of coins, and a rolled map. Cyprian stared at the supplies. "You prepared to run with someone." "I prepared to run with anyone who needed it," Tavern said, though his gaze lingered on her as if admitting something he wouldn't say aloud. They rode hard through the night, keeping off main roads, cutting through old courier paths Cyprian recognized with a shock of familiarity. Tavern seemed to know them too, or perhaps he simply trusted her when she pointed silently, left at the split, avoid the river crossing, follow the ridge. At dawn they reached a shallow valley where the wind softened. A line of smoke rose from a small cabin tucked against a hill, half hidden by snowdrifts. Cyprian's heart stuttered. "Who lives there?" "No one," Tavern said. "Not anymore. It belonged to a retired scout. He owed me a favor and left the key with Apollon before he died." The cabin was simple. 1 room, a small loft, a stove, stacks of firewood. It smelled faintly of pine resin and old wool. Tavern bolted the door, then stood still as if he didn't know what to do with his hands without a fortress to command. Cyprian shrugged off her cloak and sank onto a bench. Her body felt hollowed out, like she had poured everything into the hall and left nothing behind. Tavern set water on the stove. The ordinary act looked strange on him, as if he wore it awkwardly, unused to being just a man in a small room. After a while, he spoke without turning around. "They will send hunters, not the market kind, the fortress kind, disciplined." Cyprian nodded, throat too tight for words. Tavern continued, voice rough. "The border chiefs will claim I broke the pact. The council will claim I endangered the realm. They'll offer a bounty." Cyprian's nails dug into her palm. "So we'll be chased forever." "For a time," Tavern said. "Then the world will move on as it always does." Cyprian laughed, bitter. "And what about us? Do we just become ghosts in the snow?" Tavern finally turned. His gaze landed on her throat, on the bare skin where the patch had been. His eyes softened just slightly, and the softness was more dangerous than any threat. "No," he said, "we become a choice." Cyprian held his gaze. "A choice to do what?" Tavern stepped closer, slow, careful, as if approaching a skittish animal. "To live," he said. "To stop being used as tools by men who don't bleed for their own decisions." Cyprian's breath caught. Her body's instincts stirred, drawn to him, to strength and steadiness, to the way he had stood between her and a hall full of wolves and said no. She forced herself to speak anyway, because trust needed words, not just hunger. "You could still take me," she said, voice quiet. "You're alpha, we're alone. No council to judge you." Tavern stopped a few feet away, as if her words were a boundary he would not cross. His voice came low, absolute. "I will not." Cyprian's eyes burned. "Why?" Tavern's jaw clenched, then eased. "Because if anything happens between us, it will be because you wanted it with your mind clear, not because your body was pushed into a corner. Because I will not become another kind of market." The room felt suddenly too small for her heartbeat. Cyprian swallowed, struggling to keep her voice steady. "And what if I do want it?" Tavern's breath hitched, the first real crack in his composure since the hall. He held still, as if even movement might become coercion. "Then tell me when you are safe enough to mean it." Cyprian stared at him for a long moment, and in that stare, something in her finally loosened, not the storm, but the knot of loneliness that had been living under her ribs for years. She stood and walked toward him until she was close enough to feel his warmth. She lifted a hand, slow, giving him every chance to step away, and placed her palm against his chest. His heart was steady and fast beneath her hand. Cyprian's voice came out like a confession. "I don't know if I'm safe," she whispered, "but I know you didn't let them ink me." Tavern's eyes lowered to her hand, then back to her face. "I couldn't," he murmured. Cyprian took a breath. The cabin smelled of pine and heat and the faintest trace of his cedar smoke scent. Her own storm scent lay quiet now, not suppressed but settled, as if it had finally found a place to rest. She rose on her toes and pressed a kiss to the corner of his mouth, brief, careful, a question rather than a claim. Tavern's eyes closed for a heartbeat. When they opened, the restraint in them remained, but it was no longer only armor. It was reverence. He lifted his hands slowly, waiting for her to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face with both palms, warm and steady, and kissed her fully, not with hunger that took, but with a fierce gentleness that felt like shelter. Cyprian's chest ached with relief so intense it almost hurt. When they parted, Tavern rested his forehead against hers. "We'll have to move again soon," he murmured. "This cabin won't hold forever." Cyprian's laugh was soft, surprised by hope. "I'm good at moving." "I know," Tavern said, and his mouth curved, small and real. "Courier." Cyprian's eyes widened. "You knew that too." Tavern's gaze slid away, almost sheepish in a way that didn't fit him. "I read the reports. I've seen your name on intercepted letters. You were fast, impossible to catch until the snare." Cyprian's throat tightened. "So you didn't buy a stranger." "I bought a woman the world kept trying to erase," Tavern said, voice low, "and I'm tired of the world succeeding." They spent that day quietly, like people learning what silence feels like when it isn't fear. Tavern chopped wood. Cyprian repaired a tear in the cloak with thread she found in a drawer. They ate bread and dried meat and drank tea while the wind rattled the cabin walls. At dusk, Tavern spread the map on the table. "There's a free city west of the border," he said, finger tracing a line. "No chiefs, no council. They don't care what fortress calls me traitor as long as I don't bring war to their gate." Cyprian leaned over the map. "And what do we do there?" Tavern's gaze lifted to her, steady. "We live under our own names," he said. "Or we take new ones, we find work. I can guard caravans. You can run letters again if you want. And if the fortress keeps hunting, we keep moving until the hunt grows bored." Cyprian's fingers touched the ink line of the road. "They'll still want me. Rare doesn't stop being rare." Tavern's voice was calm, but there was steel under it. "Then they'll learn rare can bite." Cyprian looked at him, and the storm inside her stirred, not in panic, but in agreement. Later, when night settled thick and quiet, Cyprian lay in bed with Tavern beside her, their bodies close without being tangled, warmth shared without pressure. Outside, snow fell in slow hushes, covering tracks, softening edges. Cyprian listened to Tavern's breathing and let herself believe, for the first time in a long time, that the future could be something other than a cage. In the morning, they would leave before their fire's smoke could betray them. They would become two figures on a road, a warden without a fortress and an Omega without a chain, carrying nothing sacred but their refusal to be used. And somewhere behind them, the Hall of Oaths would be cleaned, ink scrubbed from stone, banners straightened, speeches rewritten to make Tavern a villain and Cyprian a threat. Let them. Cyprian closed her eyes and smiled into the dark, feeling Tavern's hand find hers under the blanket, fingers curling gently, asking without demanding. She squeezed back. Outside, the wind shifted, and the world, vast, cruel, and beautiful, kept turning. They would turn with it.